Emily was used to being invisible. For 2 years, she scrubbed floors, polished mirrors, and dusted surfaces in one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. To the wealthy guests who breezed through the marble-clad halls, she was just part of the scenery, no more significant than the crystal chandeliers or the Persian rugs underfoot. But in her heart, Emily carried more than the burden of her mop and bucket. She carried the quiet dignity of someone who saw everything yet was never seen. That day began like any other. Her fingers clutched a rag damp with disinfectant as she worked her way through yet another suite. This one belonged to James Wilson, a billionaire she had only glimpsed from afar. Normally, his comings and goings barely registered in her world. But as Emily wiped down the nightstand, hushed voices floated from the adjoining room. She paused. At first, she thought it was none of her business. Guests had their secrets, and Emily had long ago learned to turn a deaf ear. But this was different. The woman's voice, sharp and venomous, sent chills down her spine. "He'll never see it coming," the woman whispered, her tone dripping with malice. Emily's breath hitched. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to leave, to pretend she hadn't heard. But she couldn't move. The words continued, sinking into her like shards of glass. "This trip will be his last," the woman added. A man's voice responded, low and cold. "We need to be careful. If we're exposed, it's over." Emily's blood ran cold. She knew the voices. Amanda Wilson, James's wife, and a man she didn't recognize. Her pulse quickened. They weren't just scheming. They were plotting murder. For a moment she stood paralyzed. The air seemed heavier, pressing against her chest. Then her survival instincts kicked in. She backed away from the door, her breath shallow. "What do I do?" she whispered to herself, her voice trembling. Calling the police seemed pointless. Who would believe her, a maid, over someone as powerful as Amanda Wilson? And what if they found out it was her who had overheard? Emily clenched her fists. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't even brave. But she couldn't let someone die. Not when she had the power to stop it. The next morning, Emily's nerves were shot. She spotted James Wilson in the hotel lobby, surrounded by his usual entourage. Her heart raced as she crossed the polished floor, rehearsing her words in her head. "Mr. Wilson," she called out, her voice steadier than she expected. James turned, his sharp eyes narrowing as they landed on her. "Yes?" Emily hesitated. The weight of what she was about to say threatened to crush her. "I need to tell you something. About your trip. You shouldn't go. Something isn't right." James raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. "And why should I trust you?" Emily swallowed hard. She hadn't thought this far ahead. "Because I overheard something. A conversation between your wife and another man." The mention of Amanda made James stiffen. For a moment something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, curiosity. But it was gone as quickly as it came. "This is absurd," he said, turning to leave. "Please," Emily blurted, stepping closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I can't explain everything, but trust me. Don't go on that trip." James studied her, his gaze piercing. Then, with a curt nod, he said, "I'll think about it." As he walked away, Emily's legs threatened to give out beneath her. She had done what she could. The rest was up to him. But as the day wore on, Emily's anxiety didn't subside. What if James dismissed her warning? What if Amanda's plan succeeded? The weight of the secret she carried was suffocating. Later that evening, as Emily sat alone in the staff lounge, she stared at the cheap coffee in her hands. She replayed the morning's encounter over and over, her mind racing with doubts and fears. "He's not going to listen," she muttered, her voice bitter. Why would he? But even as doubt clawed at her, Emily knew she couldn't have done anything differently. She wasn't sure what kind of man James Wilson was, but no one deserved to die at the hands of someone they trusted. As the sun set and the city's lights twinkled through the lounge's narrow window, Emily resolved to prepare herself for whatever came next. Her warning was out there, but the danger still loomed. Somewhere, Amanda and her accomplice were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Emily barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, Amanda's chilling words echoed in her mind. He'll never see it coming. She had done her part, but the thought of what might happen if James ignored her warning gnawed at her. The next morning, her heart nearly stopped when she stepped outside her modest apartment. A sleek black car, far too luxurious for her run-down neighborhood, was parked just a few feet away. Her instinct was to turn and run, but the driver, a man in a tailored black suit, stepped out and approached her with calm, deliberate steps. "Miss Emily?" he asked, his voice measured but polite. Emily nodded, her throat dry. The man reached into his jacket pocket and produced a white envelope, embossed with a gold seal. "This is for you," he said, extending it toward her. "Who sent this?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. "Mr. James Wilson," the driver replied, tipping his hat slightly. "He wanted to make sure you received it personally." Before she could ask anything else, the driver returned to the car and disappeared down the street, leaving Emily standing frozen on the sidewalk. Back in her apartment, her hands shook as she opened the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. "Thank you for your concern. I've cancelled the trip. Enclosed is something I believe you'll find useful." Beneath the note was a single key, attached to a polished silver keychain engraved with the words Wilshire Towers. Emily's breath hitched. She knew the name. Wilshire Towers was one of the most exclusive apartment buildings in the city. Why would James give her something like this? Her phone buzzed, startling her. A message from an unknown number flashed on the screen. "Your new place is ready. Welcome to a fresh start. J.W." Emily stared at the message, disbelief and confusion swirling inside her. Gratitude wasn't unusual, but this? It felt excessive, suspicious even. Emily couldn't stop thinking about the key. By the time evening rolled around, curiosity outweighed her doubts. She found herself standing outside Wilshire Towers, its imposing glass facade gleaming in the fading sunlight. The doorman greeted her with a warm smile as if she belonged there. "Miss Emily, welcome. Everything's been arranged. Take the elevator to the 15th floor." Inside the apartment, Emily's breath caught. The space was stunning. Hardwood floors, floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of the city skyline, and sleek modern furniture. It was a far cry from her cramped studio. As she wandered through the rooms, a knock on the door startled her. She opened it to find a young man in a tailored suit holding a clipboard. "Miss Emily, I'm Evan, Mr. Wilson's assistant. He asked me to ensure you're comfortable and to give you a brief tour of the building." Emily followed Evan in a daze as he showed her the gym, pool, and lounge areas. But her unease only grew. This was too much, too fast. What did James expect in return? Later that night, as she sat by the window, staring at the city lights, her phone rang. This time, the voice on the other end made her blood run cold. "Emily," Amanda said, her tone as sharp as a knife. "We need to talk." Emily's grip on the phone tightened. "How did you get this number?" Amanda chuckled, the sound icy and mocking. "Oh, Emily, did you really think you could meddle in my business and walk away unscathed? You made a big mistake." "I don't know what you're talking about," Emily said, though her voice betrayed her fear. "You think you're clever," Amanda hissed. "But people like you don't get to mess with people like me. Enjoy your little gift from James while it lasts. It won't save you." The line went dead, leaving Emily shaking. Amanda knew. For the first time, Emily realized she wasn't just a maid caught in a web of lies. She was now a threat. The next morning, there was another knock on her door. This time, it was James himself. He looked different, less polished, more serious. "We need to talk," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "What's going on?" Emily demanded. "Why did Amanda call me?" James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Because she's onto us. After your warning, I started digging deeper into her activities, and what I found..." He hesitated. "It's bigger than we thought." "What do you mean?" James's expression darkened. Amanda's family isn't just involved in petty schemes. They're criminals. They've ruined lives to protect their empire. And your father. Emily's heart sank. What about my father? James's voice softened. I didn't realize it until recently, but I knew him. We grew up together. He was framed by Amanda's family and... I'm sorry, Emily. His death wasn't an accident. It was murder. Emily stumbled back, her legs giving out beneath her. Number, that's not possible. He died in a car accident. They made it look that way, James said gently. Your father was going to expose them. They couldn't let that happen. Tears welled in Emily's eyes. All these years, she had believed her father's death was a tragic accident. Now, the truth was a knife to her heart. What do we do? She whispered, her voice trembling. James's gaze hardened. We gather evidence, we expose them, and we make sure they can never hurt anyone again. Emily nodded, determination replacing her fear. Amanda had taken everything from her family. It was time to fight back. The days that followed were a whirlwind of tension and preparation. James had shared everything with Emily, the fraud, the betrayals, and the string of ruined lives Amanda's family left in their wake. But it was the revelation about her father that ignited a fire in Emily. Amanda's actions weren't just criminal, they were personal. We need proof, James said one evening as they reviewed his findings. Amanda's family has protected themselves for years with blackmail and bribes. The only way to bring them down is to find something they can't deny. Emily frowned. How? They've covered their tracks this long. There has to be more. James leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. There is. Ryan told me something. Amanda keeps a stash of incriminating files at her family estate. It's a safe house, practically abandoned, but she still uses it to hide anything too dangerous to keep elsewhere. Emily's breath caught. If we can get those files, we can expose her, James finished. The plan was simple on paper but fraught with danger. The estate was isolated, miles outside the city, and though it was rarely guarded, Amanda's influence was everywhere. One misstep could cost them everything. Are you sure you want to do this? James asked as they finalized their approach. Emily's jaw tightened. I have to. She took my father's life. She's not taking anything else. The night of the break-in was thick with tension. Emily and James parked their car a safe distance from the estate, its imposing silhouette looming in the moonlight. The iron gates stood slightly ajar, as Ryan had promised, but every creak of the hinges as they slipped through felt deafening. Stay close, James whispered, his voice barely audible. The mansion was dark, its windows like empty eyes watching their every move. Inside, the air was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of mildew. Emily's heart pounded as they crept through the silent halls, the faint creak of the wooden floors beneath their feet amplifying her nerves. The study should be up ahead, James said, pointing toward a grand staircase. They moved quickly, their footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The study was just as Ryan described, a dimly lit room lined with bookshelves. James immediately began searching for the hidden panel behind the desk, his fingers running along the edges of the ornate woodwork. Found it, he whispered after a few tense moments. The panel slid open with a soft click, revealing a small steel safe. Emily stood guard by the door, her ears straining for any sound. Her stomach churned with unease, the silence around them feeling too perfect. Hurry, she urged, glancing nervously over her shoulder. James worked on the safe, his movements precise but quick. Finally, with a quiet click, the door swung open. He pulled out a stack of files, their edges yellowed with age, and began stuffing them into his bag. We've got it, James said, relief evident in his voice. But just as they turned to leave, the faint sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Emily's breath caught in her throat. Someone's here, she whispered, her voice trembling. The footsteps grew louder, and before they could react, the study door creaked open. Amanda stepped into the room, her eyes cold and calculating. her lips curling into a smug smile. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I should have known you'd stoop this low, James. And you—" Her gaze shifted to Emily, filled with disdain. "The maid who thinks she's a hero." Emily's fists clenched, but James stepped forward, his expression hard. "It's over, Amanda. We have the files. Your lies, your crimes, they're all coming out." Amanda laughed, the sound sharp and cruel. "Do you really think it's that simple? You have no idea who you're dealing with." Before either of them could respond, Ryan stepped out from behind Amanda, a gun in his hand. Emily's heart sank. "Ryan?" she breathed, disbelief washing over her. Ryan's face was pale, his grip on the weapon unsteady. "I didn't have a choice," he muttered, avoiding Emily's gaze. "Of course you didn't," Amanda sneered. "Loyalty isn't something people like Ryan understand. Fear, however—" She trailed off, her smile widening. "Ryan, don't do this," James said, his voice calm but firm. "You know what Amanda's capable of. Don't let her drag you down with her." Ryan's hand trembled. His eyes flicked between Amanda and James, uncertainty flickering across his face. "Don't listen to him," Amanda snapped, her tone icy. "You think they'll protect you? You'll go down just like the rest of them if you cross me." Emily took a cautious step forward. "Ryan, please. This is your chance to do the right thing. She's using you. If you help us, you can walk away from this. You can be free." For a moment the room was silent, the tension unbearable. Then, slowly, Ryan's arm dropped. The gun slipped from his hand, clattering to the floor. "You're a fool," Amanda hissed, lunging for the weapon. But James was faster. He grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back and pinning her in place. "Ryan, help me secure her," James barked, and Ryan scrambled to pick up the gun. Amanda struggled, her voice a venomous snarl. "You think this is over? You think you've won?" James tightened his grip. "It's over, Amanda. You've lost." But as the sound of distant footsteps reached their ears, Emily's stomach twisted. Amanda's men were coming. "We need to move," Ryan said, his voice shaky but determined. James nodded, pulling Amanda toward the door. Emily grabbed the bag of files, her heart pounding as they raced down the hallway. The mansion came alive with noise as Amanda's men closed in. Gunfire rang out, the deafening cracks echoing through the halls. Emily ducked instinctively, adrenaline surging through her veins. As they reached the front door, James turned to Emily, his expression grim but resolute. "We have to make it to the car. Stay low. Stay close." With one final push, they burst into the night, the cold air hitting them like a shock. Amanda's men were right behind them, but Emily didn't look back. She couldn't. The car roared to life as they dove inside. Ryan hit the gas, the tires screeching as they sped down the long driveway. Bullets ricocheted off the car's metal frame, but they didn't stop. As the mansion disappeared behind them, Emily clutched the files tightly, her chest heaving. They had escaped, for now. But Amanda's chilling laughter echoed in her mind, a reminder that this fight was far from over. The tension in the car was suffocating as they sped away from Amanda's estate. Ryan kept glancing at the rearview mirror, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Emily clutched the bag of files tightly, her heart still racing. James, seated beside her, was calm on the surface, but the storm in his eyes betrayed his true feelings. Amanda sat in the back seat, her hands bound, her gaze fixed on Emily with a venomous intensity. "You've made a grave mistake," Amanda said, her voice low but cutting. James didn't turn to look at her. "The only mistake was thinking you could get away with this forever." Amanda smirked. "Do you really think a few papers will bring me down? My family has weathered worse storms than this." "Not this time," Emily said, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her chest. "This time, the truth comes out." Amanda's eyes narrowed, her expression hardening, but she said nothing more. As they neared the outskirts of the city, James pulled out his phone and called Detective Martinez. "We've got Amanda and the evidence," he said, his tone urgent. Where should we meet? After a brief pause, Martinez's voice came through, calm but firm. Don't bring her to the station. There's been a leak. Go to the safe house on 8th Avenue. I'll meet you there. James frowned but didn't argue. He gave Ryan the new destination, and the car veered off toward the industrial district. Emily couldn't shake the unease creeping up her spine. Something about Amanda's smug silence felt wrong, like she was waiting for something they couldn't see. The warehouse on 8th Avenue was dark and foreboding, its exterior battered by years of neglect. Ryan parked near the entrance, and they cautiously exited the car. James kept a firm grip on Amanda, while Emily carried the bag of files. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of oil and rust. Flickering overhead lights cast eerie shadows on the walls. Emily's grip tightened on the bag as they moved deeper into the building. "Where's Martinez?" James muttered, glancing around. The sound of footsteps echoed before anyone could respond. A group of men appeared at the far end of the warehouse, their guns drawn and faces cold. Amanda's smile returned, slow and triumphant. "You didn't think it would be that easy, did you?" she said, her voice dripping with malice. Emily's heart sank. It was a trap. James pushed Emily behind him, his hand going to the small knife he carried. "Stay close," he whispered. One of the men stepped forward, his weapon aimed at James. "Hand over the files and we'll make this quick." "Not a chance," James said, his voice calm but resolute. The standoff stretched unbearably. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. Then, without warning, a voice rang out from behind the armed men. "Lower your weapons!" Detective Martinez emerged, flanked by a team of officers. The tide shifted instantly as the officers took control, disarming Amanda's men and securing the files. Amanda's composure cracked for the first time. "This isn't over!" she spat as Martinez approached her. "Oh, it's very much over," Martinez said, snapping handcuffs onto her wrists. Emily watched as Amanda was led away, her venomous gaze still locked on Emily. It was over. But the weight in Emily's chest didn't lift. The following days passed in a blur. Amanda's arrest sent shockwaves through the city, making headlines across every major news outlet. The files Emily and James retrieved were damning, records of fraud, bribes, and even evidence tying Amanda to multiple deaths, including Emily's father. Emily sat in a small office at the police station, waiting for Detective Martinez. The chaos of the past week had left her emotionally drained, but she couldn't rest until Amanda was formally charged. When Martinez finally entered, he held a file in his hands, his expression serious but kind. "Emily, I wanted you to see this." He placed the file on the desk. Inside were documents confirming Amanda's direct involvement in her father's death. Emily's hands trembled as she read the details, tears welling in her eyes. "She's going to pay for what she's done," Martinez said. "You made this happen." Emily nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "It doesn't bring him back, but it's something." At the trial, Emily sat in the gallery, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She listened as the prosecutor laid out Amanda's crimes, piece by piece, each revelation more damning than the last. Ryan's testimony was pivotal. He detailed Amanda's schemes, her ruthlessness, and the way she silenced anyone who got in her way. When the verdict came, Emily held her breath. "Guilty on all counts." The words echoed in the courtroom, and for the first time, Emily felt a sense of closure. Amanda was led away in handcuffs, her expression a mix of fury and disbelief. James placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's over," he said. Emily nodded, though her heart still felt heavy. "I know. But what now?" James smiled faintly. "Now, you start living for yourself. Your father would want that." That evening, Emily returned to her modest new apartment. It wasn't luxurious like Wilshire Towers, but it was hers, a place where she could finally begin to heal. As she sat on the balcony, watching the city lights, she thought of her father. "I did it, Dad," she whispered. "I got justice for you." The wind carried her words into the night, and for the first time in years, Emily felt free. The past had held her captive for too long, but now she was ready to move forward. And though the road ahead was uncertain, Emily knew she had the strength to face it. Weeks after Amanda's conviction, life began to take on a semblance of normalcy for Emily. The public fallout from the trial was immense. Amanda's name became synonymous with betrayal and greed, and her family's once powerful empire crumbled under the weight of the evidence. For Emily, however, the spotlight wasn't something she sought. Her focus was on healing. She moved into a modest apartment of her choosing, far from the grandeur of Wilshire Towers, and started a new job at a community centre. Helping others felt like the right path, using her experience to guide those who felt powerless, just as she once had. One afternoon, as Emily sorted through boxes of donated items, a familiar voice called out. She turned to see James standing in the doorway, a soft smile on his face. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing," he said. Emily smiled. "I'm good. Better than I've been in a long time." James nodded, his gaze lingering on her, as though he were weighing his words. "You've come a long way, Emily. Not many people could have faced what you did and come out stronger." "I didn't do it alone," she replied, her voice steady. "You stood by me, even when things got dangerous." James shrugged with a faint grin. "Well, I owed you. You saved my life, remember?" Emily laughed softly, the tension that once defined their interactions now replaced by a deep camaraderie. As they spoke, Emily felt a sense of clarity. Her father's memory no longer felt like a weight dragging her down. Instead, it was a source of strength, a reminder of why she fought so hard for the truth. Emily stood on the balcony of her apartment that evening, watching the sunset bathe the city in warm hues. Life was still uncertain, but she had learned to embrace the unknown. She wasn't just a survivor. She was someone who had reclaimed her life and her voice. And now she had a message for others. Stand up for what's right, even when it feels impossible. You may be surprised by your own strength. What about you? What would you do if you found yourself in Emily's shoes? Would you risk everything to fight for the truth? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you enjoyed this story, give it a like, share it with others, and subscribe to our channel for more thrilling and heartfelt tales. Your support helps us continue to create stories that inspire and captivate. And remember, no matter what challenges you face, believe in yourself. You're stronger than you think. Thank you for watching, and we wish you a wonderful and lucky day ahead.